Jürgen has already explained, I'm coming from the innovation economic side. I'm looking at innovation networks and innovation systems. And this is why it is so interesting to work with you all. And I've spoken to a few of you already to really share practices. Because if you think about innovation, it is about exchange. The best and most powerful innovation systems work because there is a constant exchange of ideas and experiences and learning from each other. And as Thiago said already, this is why we are here. I am not here to tell you how to do things. I'm here to help bringing you together and maybe give you pointers what to look for. Often consultants do it the other way around. They come in and tell you what to do. That is not my method. As most of you know, we have done a survey collecting your experiences. And tomorrow in our session, we will look precisely at those experiences that come from you. What I'm going to do today is more of giving an overview of what we think in our team here with Arise plus IPR, with my colleagues who are not here today, what we think is something that we should put attention to. And I was partly brought in because this year, Denemeyer published a rather large study about what we call the future of IP. We spoke with about 60 experts from all sorts of backgrounds, including IP officers, including government, including companies, universities, what have you, to see what is important these days. What keeps people awake at night? Hopefully not, but you get my meaning. So what I'm going to do is I will give you a brief overview of what is going on in the world, and quite obviously, something that is extremely in the foreground these days is COVID-19, remote working, digitalization, and that's what I will focus on. And I will then translate that, try to translate that into what all this means for IP officers. And this is sort of bringing it back into the broader picture. We're taking COVID-19 and the pandemic situation to set the scene and to see what is really urgent right now. But this has larger implications. We're not going into COVID and everything changes. The changes have been there before. And I'll look at that in the next few minutes. So as I said, and this is the worst slide of the whole presentation, don't worry about it, you can read it in your own time. We, as I said, did through 2020 this major study, speaking to loads and loads of experts from loads and loads of backgrounds. We collected their views and their experiences, and we published this study, The Future of IP, in early summer 2021. And I'm not going to tell you to download it or anything. I'm here to tell you what we did. So, as I said before, one of the major findings here is that the current pandemic situation, the current crisis, is not really changing the world. The changes were happening before. But what we see is that those phenomena become more pronounced. They're more visible and they're far more urgent. So even before Corona hit, we had this trend of globalization slowing down. If you think to Europe, where I'm sitting, Brexit happened, or the British people voted for Brexit. We had several elections around the world that brought into power leaders that were not that interested in international cooperation, that wanted to focus on the well-being of their own countries first. Don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with that. but it is a trend that has been there for at least 5-7 years. It really started with the financial crisis 12 years ago. But it became a lot more pronounced, a lot more visible through Corona, because think about the races for vaccines and vaccine nationalism, so really out in the open. And then what we're here for, really, the so-called digital revolution actually happened. I will speak about that in a minute in a bit more detail. We have seen shifts in geopolitical power. We have seen global inequality becoming more pronounced. And all that, as I said, was there before. So with respect to IP itself, because obviously we were doing a study about IP, there's a lot, again, that has been happening for a while, but has become more pronounced and more visible with Corona. So we see that, for example, patent fragmentation, which means, as you know, obviously, more and more smaller and smaller patents that cover less and less, that has become even more pronounced because IP is becoming more important from a strategic point of view for many firms. What we also see, and this then in a moment goes back to IP officers and their role in the whole thing, IP also becomes more important for governments. If you look at government tenders, studies, policy advisory, over the last 5 years, you will find the word IP or intellectual property far more often as governments realize that this is actually quite important and that they should focus on that. And I know that there's a bit of frustration around the world in IP offices that they do such an important job, but until recently haven't really had the weight within government policy. That is changing. We talked a lot about digitalization, and I will talk about that a bit more later on. It's not about going digital, and that is really what I want to bring home here. That is really what I want to emphasize. It's not about saying by next Tuesday we're all digital. No, it is a slow process, and we need to manage that carefully, and that's what we're here for. IP management with strategic importance becomes more professionalized. That is more sort of on the company, on the private sector side, but that also impacts IP offices when it comes to outsourcing, say annuity payments, trademark renewals, and IP management systems going digital. Everyone's talking about big data. I shall talk about big data in a moment. I will also talk more tomorrow about the fact that international IP regime harmonization is falling far more on the actual actors, that is the IP offices, and we will look at that tomorrow and sort of mention it later today, but really go back to that tomorrow. And more for again, the private sector, the role of the IP manager is changing, but that is quite interesting because we call it data and business savvy, and the IP manager becomes an asset manager, a communicator, and an advisor. And that impacts again on IP officers because your clients are changing. And that is what we need to keep in mind. So the more important things for us are the 3 ones that are red, and I will look at those, the point 4 and point 6 today, with an implication for the role that IP officers are playing. And then tomorrow, we really drive into those roles and look at how you people who unfortunately can't see in this virtual room are dealing with those challenges on a day-to-day basis. Okay, let's start with digitalization. Everyone talks about that. And I want to give you a brief overview of what was really driven home in our study, in the course of our study, what people told us, what they're dealing with. And let's look at that from a Corona perspective, so to speak, that we look at 2020 and COVID as a bit of a turning point. And I know we are approaching the end of 2021. Obviously, when we did those interviews, it was still 2020, and we were not quite sure how long we would be in a pandemic situation. You can take that as 2022 and beyond if you wish. So starting out, what we found, and I think what you have a lot in your own life, is everyone talks about digitalization. But how often have you really heard one concrete definition of that? Is it using email? Is it IPOS Go? Is it online filing, online annuities? Is it something much bigger, or is it teleworking from home? Everyone is talking about that. It is a buzzword, but when two people talk about digitalization, they might actually mean slightly different things. And then not everyone is doing it, or they're doing it at different paces. We have those front runners. Think about every digital business model. Look at Amazon, for example. Look at Zoom, which we're using right now. But then you have those brick and mortar factories that still think that digitalization is pretty much writing an email. So we have different paces of implementation. And somebody that I talked to from Sasol in South Africa said, we have those dinosaurs, and it's a world of dinosaurs. Everyone's talking about evolution. Everyone's talking about the mammals coming, but really we are still dinosaurs and quite comfortable. And then 2020 started. 2020 happened. COVID-19 hit us like, I don't know, an avalanche, really. We all went into home offices. Governments sometimes panicked because nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew how deadly it was, how contagious it was. So we went into the home office due to lockdowns. IP offices had to go digital. We're talking very much trademarks here, but I can tell you that the European Patent Office, until very recently, still sent communication by fax machine. So a lot of patent attorneys had to send somebody into the office once a week to check the fax machine, which is not digitalization. So there was a big pressure on everyone, you, me, our employers, governments, everyone, to go digital, to go into remote working. And again, one of my interview partners called that the necessary pain. We were all talking about digitalization and everyone did it a bit, some a bit more, some a bit less, but now everyone had to do it. So there was this necessary pain, and suddenly we could actually talk about what are the difficulties, what are the challenges that we're dealing with. And we could actually pinpoint them, starting with slow internet connection, starting with people sitting at home not having a camera or a laptop, but working from a desktop computer. So you had meetings where half of the screen was black, which is really hard when you don't have that personal touch point with people. But we adapted because we had to, we didn't have a chance. And that's the big difference from what was there before when everyone talked about it. You did have a choice then. You could stand up, go into the next office and speak to your colleague. Your clients could come in with a piece of paper saying, yes, I want to work with that, or I want to make a cash payment. No offices were closed. We had to do it. And that changed the whole outlook. So new business models evolved, both from obviously the private sector. Think about the restaurant sector, how much they adapted to deliveries, to upfront cash, you pay now, you eat later, online cooking courses, meal kits, simply to survive because you couldn't bring people in anymore. So the whole world of doing business changed, your clients changed. They had been changing for a long time. We have seen digitalization efforts for a long time, But now everyone had to do it. And I know that at least one IP office, I think it was the Philippines, correct me if I'm wrong, actually said, no, you cannot make applications anymore offline. You have to do it online. It's 100% online now to protect you, to implement our more efficient digital service. Some went to that extreme, some tried to have a skeleton crew still on board. But we had this pressure to adapt or die in the case of many, many companies. And as a side remark, in taking that slightly annoying person out of my screen, IP litigation used to be quite stable, and we're talking very much patents here at the moment, because they have the most reliable short-term statistics. But what we had before 2020, we had recovered from the global financial crisis to a certain extent. Things were fairly stable, indicating that there wasn't that much change. Whereas since Corona hit us, IP litigation has actually grown, simply because the world of business changes. Digital business becomes so much more important, it actually becomes essential. Those IPRs, and that goes for trademarks, for designs, for anything you can think of, if they cover a digital business model, they become more valuable. So people are much more prepared if they have those IP rights to fight about them, because those that survived the crisis do have the financial means to fight about it. So I know that some people in the room here, depending on the office that you're from, your office also handles patents. You will find that, but you will also find that with trademarks quite a lot. So we have a shakeup, not only an economic shakeup, but also an IP shakeup and a push towards a far more digital world. And we need to deal with that. So how do we deal with that? And I said earlier on that digitalization is more than being digital. If your boss comes to you and says, by next Tuesday, everything will be digital, that is a bit like putting a square peg onto a round hole. It won't work. First of all, if somebody tells you that from tomorrow or from next Tuesday, everything changes without preparing you, just saying, okay, flip the switch, we're changing, you will find a pushback. That is what in organizational theory we call organizational resistance or inertia. That simply if you push, it's like pulling or pushing an elastic band. You get slowed down, there is resistance. So what we need is we need to think not about going digital. Ooh, Singapore has a great app, everyone should do that. No, we need to think about, they have a great app. How do we make most out of it for our clients and for us? And that varies from place to place, from office to office. And that's why we're here, to exchange those ideas, but not having one size fits all solutions. Because digitalization is a lot more than we might think about. It's not about having the systems in place. It's about being ready. That means that the people that are working with in the digital processes, with the digital systems, with the software, with the apps, they need to see a benefit. So if I flick out my phone and say, I want to register a trademark online, for me, that's simple because I'm more or less a digital native. But what if I am somewhere where there's no coverage? I'm sitting in Germany. We actually have pretty bad mobile data coverage. So I might need to pick up a proper phone, a landline. So we need to have the readiness there. We need to then have the infrastructure there. As I said, an app might be totally great. And actually, in a lot of countries, this is the way forward because very many leave out the physical infrastructure. They go mobile because younger populations It's easier to put up one antenna than have a huge physical network. People are more comfortable with smartphones these days. So we need to have this readiness and the right infrastructure to then work in digital systems. And I think everyone here knows that. I'm not telling you something new. You need to have the processes around it. If your process, or rather, let me give you an example from a client that I worked with. They had implemented a digital IP, an IP management system. So all their files, all their cases were handled digitally. In theory, they came from paper files, and their master file, despite having this great system there, really sophisticated, really expensive, they still had as the master file the paper file, which meant that all their processes were still geared to the paper file. And this hugely sophisticated, really expensive, big system merely served as a backup. So you did something on paper, and then you manually put it into the system. That is not the process that you need to get most out of the digital world. You need to think, okay, what is this? What can it do for me? And how do I work it? So it's all great. And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing Singapore here, but it's all great to have an app, but you have to have everything behind it, the people behind it that work with those digital processes. I remember people, and I'm old enough to do that, who said, oh yeah, everything email. And then they print off every single email and put it in a folder. Yeah, they're using email, but they're not digital. And that is something that we need to deal with. And then we need to train the people, obviously. So what we did in that project that I just mentioned, we trained people to build their processes around the system, but then also train the people. You all know that if you have a new system and nobody shows you how it works, you hate it. Okay, where do I have to do that? It's really about creating proficiency, because that then creates acceptance, and then you are digital. It is not about being just digital. It's about a much greater change. And it's not about changing for the sake of change. Oh, new idea, new program, let's do that. It's brilliant. You don't know that. You have to work with the people, with your environment, know where you are. That is the important takeaway that we got out of the study. It's not just, oh, digitalization is great. It's not. It's far more complicated than that. Let's move a bit to big data, and I'll do that a bit more quickly because I really think the digitalization one is the most important thing that we need to talk about when we talk about teleworking, when we talk about apps, digital processes. This is more to give you a flavor of what else is out there. So the other big buzzword is big data. It's brilliant. Everyone loves big data. It's so great. We have it with Stennemeyer. We have one part of the company working with big data, patent data. It's about searching patent data, monitoring, semantic searches, what have you. Everyone is big data. Great. Big data is great. We have massive data here, vast amounts. We have, through digitalization, so much more possibility to search for data, to collect data, to generate data. It's huge, it's massive, but it's also unstructured. And what the human mind does, and that is what we're hardwired to do. This is nothing new. We always need patterns and structure. Otherwise, we get really unhappy. And many of you will know that picture at the bottom there. That is the Mars canals, which were discovered by, and I forgot his first name, an astronomer called Lowell down in Arizona. He looked through a telescope onto the Mars surface and said, oh, there's channels there. No, he was actually seeing the veins in his eyelids against the light. But because we have this human urge to find patterns, he saw patterns. And it took us almost 100 years to figure out, no, there's no canals on Mars. But because we need the structure, we were so convinced that it must be there. And with digitalization, with artificial intelligence, with better and better algorithms, with machine learning, we can find more structure. We don't only need this hunch, oh yeah, there might be something, but we can actually systematically comb through data and find patterns. And you all know the round one, that's a pattern landscape, which we now do at the push of a button or a click on a box, and it puts out this beautiful pattern landscape. But for all this cleverness, algorithms are only as clever as their creators. And if you let the algorithm do all the work without checking it, you end up with a statistic like this. The per capita cheese consumption in Maine is closely related to the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. Now, do you get tangled in your bed sheet because you ate cheese? Or if you lose someone by getting tangled in their bed sheets, does that make you eat cheese to compensate your grief? It's a correlation, it's not a causation. It's actually rubbish. I used to teach that to my students, to make them understand that correlation is not causation. Although your clever little algorithm might say, hoo-hoo, that is correlated, that might be important. So we'll talk about AI, we'll talk about machine learning tomorrow, very much how those things are used by the different offices, where they see the potential. But always remember, this will not replace the human brain for a long, long time. We need the human mind to judge, to interpret, and to decide based on what algorithms, AI, machine learning gives us. So my takeaway here is, from the study and from the more I read about this and the more I speak to people who actually know their stuff, be a bit careful. This is not a panacea. This is not, once you can work with big data, everything will be great. No, and it will not replace you, because brains are needed. And one of the most important things when we talk about exchange of knowledge, going digital, serving our clients differently, expanding the roles of IP officers, we need to apply sound judgment. Please keep that in mind. And to wrap up to some extent, what does all this, what I'm telling you here, mean for you? IP is changing, not IP itself. A patent is still a patent, and it will be a patent for the foreseeable future. A trademark is still a trademark, although we add digital trademarks, we add the digital sphere, we have international harmonization. But the way IP officers do their work, how you do your work, that is changing. So the core that every IP office, be it patent, be it trademark, be it design, it doesn't matter. Some of them have it all together, some have it separate, where you have a patent office and a trademark office. We still have those core values. And really, you know more about your job than I could ever. So you know what you're doing. You want to work together. That's why we're here. We have things like, and I'm going back to patents for a moment, where we have patent prosecution highways. We have expedited examination, particularly in Asia, that is coming, that an examination report from the US is accepted as an examination report. So you, in one way, do not have to do it, but you also accept a certain standard to make it easier for digital natives to whom national borders don't matter that much anymore, to make their life easier and to protect your own citizens in the wider world. You always have to make the judgment about optimal pendency. How long does it take? How big is your backlog? What can you do? Because there is a whole shelf of economic literature that says if you don't have any queues, you will still have queues, because the moment you work through your backlog and people see that it works, more people come in, and then you have a new backlog. That comes mostly from health economics, but it works with patents and with trademarks and with any IPR as well. So those are the day-to-day policy decisions that you have to make: how many people to employ, what systems to employ, and so on. And I know that a few people told me in the survey that actually their backlog didn't increase, but because it went all digital, it decreased. And I find that very, very fascinating. You have to think about new technologies, and that is both what technologies you use, but also what technologies you protect. And that goes against your trademarks and designs as well. We're not only talking patents, which obviously cover technology solutions, but it's about evaluating what is needed, what can be protected. Things are changing. A few decades ago, somebody said, well, there will never be a market for more than 5 personal computers in the world. And look at us now, everyone sits in front of one. And that's just us, a little over 100 people. So evaluating where are we going, what is promising, what can be commercialized, how do we protect it through a trademark. With a changing world, with an evolving IP system, obviously you have to take care about your human resources. Quite a few mentioned that, that the real bottleneck is not going digital, but it's the people around it. And I alluded to that when I talked about the change management, to get people on board, to get the buy-in, to get the proficiency and the acceptance. And then, of course, and that is something that we all know about, not just IP offices, we do not win the lottery very often. We do have to manage our financial resources, and particularly now, it is really difficult. It seems that applications for all sorts of IP rights are fairly stable, with a short dip in 2020 when everything locked down. But we really need to see, will it be expanding as it did prior to COVID? Will it slow down a bit? What about the litigation that I mentioned? How do you get involved? So all that is still there. But with the changing environment, you change as well. The IP offices, and I have seen that in the last 4 years that I've been working as an IP consultant. IP in general, both in companies and in the national innovation system, because it's becoming more important, it matters to more people. So you need to bring those people together, because their common denominator often is IP. So I'm currently running a project with an engineering firm where we talk to all the different business units and marketing and finance and the CEO, how they work together with IP and how IP matters to them. And that is exactly the same for the case of IP offices, small firms, single inventors, big companies, universities, your government, foreign players, multinational companies wanting to do business in your country. You have to connect all those, and very, very often that happens through IP. Quality service, I said several times that your clients change because IP matters more to them. We're very much talking, when we talk IP strategy, about the right mix of IPRs. What should be a patent? What should be a design? What should maybe be kept as a trade secret? What should be published? Having those So this mix of IPRs to follow a corporate strategy means that IP offices need to have uniformly great service, because you don't want to be the one that hinders your clients fulfilling their optimal strategy. And that plays into the next one. I said that I'm an innovation. No, Dung said that I'm an innovation economist. I look at national innovation systems. I've said that IP becomes more important for governments. Some of you in this room do not have an independent IP office. Some are connected or run through government agencies, through ministries. So you have a very important role to play in the wider system. And that means creating efficiency, educating people, be transparent, make people understand how it matters, why it matters, and what part does it play in this national innovation system. We've done that quite a bit in the Middle East, where innovation systems are developing, where we really focused on the IP as a supportive pillar of the innovation system. And that entails all the other points that I have here. So increasing the trust. There's no point in applying for a trademark if I cannot defend it. So that is a part of the IP office that they have to take on board, because one really important thing generally in the national economy, but also in the national innovation system in particular, is trust that the institutions work, that whenever you innovate, you get the reward for that, and that usually goes through IP rights. When you protect your product through a trademark, you have to be sure that it is not plagiarized, that it is not infringed, that you are on safe ground. And that means you have to understand the system, but the system has to be dependable as well. And all that can be done by applying the human mind to big data to understand what is going on there. We actually live in really, really interesting times. They're not just difficult, they're interesting, where we work with what is called instant policy making. So very much we're looking at the available data. Gross domestic product, GDP data has a lag of at least 3 months. That doesn't help you in a COVID situation where things are working really fast. So look at patent application, look at trademark applications, look at renewals, for example, how much gets abandoned. And that can then instantly inform policy making. So with all the data, IP data you have at your fingertips, you are very, very powerful. If you have the tools to analyze it, and then have the brains, and that is the human resources from the previous slide, to make sound decisions based on that. So what does it mean for us? I've talked a lot now, and none of this will be entirely new. I hope I have put it into context. What is important for every single one of you is realize where you are. You're not all the same. Every country has been differently affected by COVID. Every IP office has a different setup. There's no such thing as an IP office that is bad. And I found that in the survey, which I will talk about tomorrow. You all have really strong features that you do really well. Identify those and build on them. Figure out where you can improve. What is needed? The IP office of the future, which sounds a bit prosaic in a way, but you're customer focused, you're customer centric. So think about what the people around you need, what your stakeholders need from you. What do you have? What do you need to fulfill those needs? Be very clear where you are, and then be very clear where you want to be. It might be that in your particular situation, you don't want to be fully digital. Maybe your clients do not have the infrastructure to go 100% online. So where do you want to be? What is the service level or the kind of service that you want to provide, and how do you want to provide it. Figure out again what is needed. You can develop in all sorts of directions. If you don't answer the needs of your clients, it's a waste of time and money. And nobody needs that. See where your country is going, where your innovation system is going, where the region, ASEAN region is going. What are the plans forward? What are the new technologies that you want to foster? Are you a country that wants to look at, or does your government want to look at biotechnology, digital technology? Do we want to go into agri-food business, as it's now happening, for example, in the United Kingdom? Where are your focus areas, and how can you as an IP office support that? And once you know where you are and where you want to be, then you figure out how you get there. Because only if you have the two endpoints can you decide where to go. And I see that a lot with my clients as well. They need to know where they are. Everyone wants to be an innovation leader. Everyone wants to have 10,000 patents and 20,000 trademarks. Yeah, but sometimes people don't need that because they are in a different situation. So once you have those two endpoints, then you can find out what is happening with the EU IPO. How are they doing it? And we'll hear about that in a minute. What is Singapore doing? What is Vietnam doing? What is Australia doing? Where can we pick things that work for us? Not copying a whole thing, but looking for best practice, coming to places like here to exchange views. In the real world, or in a different situation, we might be together physically, we might stand over a coffee and I could tell you, yeah, I had a project where this happened and this might actually be quite suitable for you. Or you come from two different countries, two different IP offices together, and somebody says, we do that for patents. Maybe that could work for trademarks as well. This is the point of learning, where you really see what others are doing, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and then you figure out, what do we need to do first? What can we do second? Where do we need what investment? You build a roadmap. You cannot achieve everything in a single day. You cannot achieve everything by next Tuesday. But you can make a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and see, where do I want to go from here and what is realistic? Because realistic plans also mean less frustration. Because you don't want to end up with that sort of aim, and in 2 years' time, you run out of money, you run out of people, and particularly you run out of steam. If you know what your goals are and how you can achieve them, and that is something that I do very much in my line of work, I build roadmaps and tell people, here's your quick win, that makes people happy quickly, this will help you be sustainable in the long run. And that is what you need to focus on. And this is what we're here for knowledge exchange, for cooperation, and for figuring out, where do we want to go from here. Thank you for your attention. I hope that was interesting for you.